before we get our hands on any fabric and thread for the center panel of the 3D collection quilt, we're going to take a super good look at the instructions, because either way you're going to need to read the instructions at some point. So we're looking at how to stitch it 3, and there's one version for the tall vase, which I have here. There's another version for the short vase, which I have here. So let's take a quick look at the tall vase first. As always, please be sure to read all instructions before starting your project. I can't emphasize that enough, because everything that you need to know is written down in the instructions somewhere. Now then, you know that you want to stitch the tall vase out. There are 2 options. If you have a hoop that's at least 240 millimeters by 360 millimeters, then you are going to stitch these designs, and they are all in one folder, and they should show up on your machine in alphabetical order. You're going to start with number 1 and work through till number 9. This is good for the Banana Jumbo hoop too. Otherwise, you will have a hoop that's at least 200 millimeters by 300 millimeters. And if that's you, and this includes the Banana Maxi hoop, then you are going to have 13 designs to stitch out. Now, before you think, oh my gosh, that's a lot of designs. It is a lot of designs, but it will give you something that is absolutely beautiful, and it is super simple to get the designs exactly where they need to be. Just take your time and keep breathing. So these designs also are in a folder, so you can just copy that folder onto your USB stick and use it in the machine. Start at number 1, work through till you get to number 13. You are going to need your background fabric and a piece of stabilizer and a piece of batting. So we've got the sizes listed here. They're all 3 the same size. I have a feeling actually that this is listed as 22 inches in the cutting. The fact that it's 20 here, everything is fine. You are good whether you have it 22 inches wide or 20 inches wide. Now then, you are going to prepare the background, and remember, this is for the tall vase version. You're going to start out with a vertical and a horizontal center line, so shown in the pink for the vertical and the blue for the horizontal. This is all written out for you here. You're going to draw vertical lines 4 inches and 8 inches to the right and left of center, and you're going to draw horizontal lines 6 inches and 12 inches below the center and 3, 6, 9 and 12 inches above the center. So that is all listed here, and I want you to always measure from the center. So you could measure 3 inches, 3 inches, 3 inches, and then 3 inches. But each time you do that, you run the risk of adding some inaccuracy. So always measure from the center line. So you're going to measure 3 inches from the center. You're going to measure 6 inches from the center, 9 inches, and 12 inches. That will give you a much more accurate result. Always measure from your center lines. So then you're going to mark the top, and the top is shown here, so make sure you've got the top in the right direction. Then you're going to place your background fabric right side down, center the batting on the wrong side of your background fabric, center the marked stabilizer right side up on the batting, and pin baste all the layers together. And I will be doing that on the video for you, so you can see exactly what's going on. Then you're going to stitch along all of the lines you marked on the stabilizer using this stitch length of 6 millimeters or 4 stitches to the inch, and make sure that you can see the bobbin thread easily on the background fabric. So we've done this before. This time. The only difference is that you've got everything slightly bigger. Now then, in the instructions that follow, for the greatest accuracy when positioning the background fabric on the stabilizer and the hoop, you always want to use the intersection that's closest to the center of the quilt as your primary intersection when two intersections are available. Now let's see. So for each of the sections, so we've got the 240mm by 360mm designs, starting out with number 1 here. We've got the orientation, so you can see exactly which way to orient the fabric, where the hoop is going to be, and where the intersections are. So number 1, number 2, we're just going to be stitching quilting designs here, and you're going to just have regular bobbin thread in the bobbin, nothing special to do there. Number 3, make a note of the fact that your top is actually down here at the bottom. We're still doing some quilting, we're adding some leaves here. Number 4, still doing some quilting, adding some more of the leaves and details. The top is up here at the top. Number 5, yet more quilting and these little flourishes. Make sure you've got the project oriented correctly so that the top is down at the bottom. And number 6, more quilting. Number 7, you're going to be stitching up the 2 flowers in the middle. So this is a 6-petal flower, this is the 7-petal flower. You want to make sure that you've stitched up the petals before you embark on stitching up this particular design. Then you're going to stitch the 5-petal flower up here. Now then, one thing that you might want to do when you have finished stitching design number 6, you've got all of the quilting completed and you're just adding the flowers and then the vase. Because of the 3D nature of the flowers, it might be a good idea to trim the quilt at this point. Just makes things a little tiny bit easier because you have everything flat, and you can safely work on the rest of the quilt, which is all on the interior of the quilt, without damaging the edges. So you might want to consider trimming at this point once you've got all of the quilting all the way around the design completed. So then add the flowers and finally add the vase at the bottom. That will give you a finished center panel. Now then, if you're doing the 200 by 300mm hoop, similar kind of deal, just a few more designs because you can't get as much stitched in a hooping. So quilting, more quilting, yet more quilting, still more quilting. Then we're starting to add some leaves on top of the quilting. This flourish here in the center, more leaves, more quilting. This time around we're actually adding the vase in here, so that's in hooping number 8. More quilting up at the top, more quilting up at the top again. Now you are adding the flowers. So at this point, if you want to, you can trim the top because it just gets a little bit more challenging when you've got the 3D stuff sitting on the on here. So this is a point where you might want to stop everything and trim the center panel to be the correct size. Then you're going to add your flowers. Again, you want to make sure you've got your petals stitched up before you embark on this design. And there's your second flower, there's the last flower. So that's the overview if you're stitching up the tall vase. If you're stitching up the short vase, Then in a hoop that's 240 by 360 millimeters, you've got these designs to stitch up. We've only got 8 for this one. And in the 200 by 300 millimeter hoop, then you've got these designs to stitch up. Again, you're going to need background fabric, stabilizer, and batting. I think this is actually where the mismatch occurs. It says 22 inches here, 22 inches wide. You will have cut fabric and everything that is 20 inches wide. So no worries, 20 or 22 inches, either is fine. Marking the background, it's going to be a little bit different. Again, you're going to have a vertical and a horizontal center line. You're going to mark 6 inches above, 6 inches below, and you're going to mark 3 inches and 6 inches to the right and left of center. Again, that is written up down here. Make sure you've got the top of the stabilizer indicated. Then you're going to layer background fabric, batting, and marked stabilizer, stitch along all of your lines. Then in your 240 by 360 hoop, we've got design number 1. Now bear in mind this piece of fabric is a little bit more square than the other one, so it's essential that you mark your top for the fabric. So design number 1 is quilting. Design number 2 adds a little bit of more quilting and the leaves. Number 3, more quilting and some leaves. Number 4, we've got some more quilting down in that bottom right corner. Now we're adding a flower as well as a little bit of quilting here. So let me see, we've got the second flower, the third flower, and the vase. So if you want to trim everything up before you start adding the flowers, this would be the spot to do it. And there is a little bit of quilting that comes in under there. You can see we've got a little bit of quilting still to be stitched. On the left hand side, we've got the top over here, so there's a little bit of quilting on the left hand side, which would be over here. But if you want to trim, you could do, although I'd potentially be inclined not to, because we've still got that little bit of quilting to do over here. And I think there's a little bit of quilting possibly potentially to be done over here as well. So this one will be trimming it with the flowers in place, which isn't actually as hard as you might think it is going to be, but that's what we'll be doing. So that's your 8 hoopings for the larger hoop. If you are stitching up in a smaller hoop, then we're actually going to start out in the center, stitching these guys, then some quilting, some more quilting, some more quilting, and we're starting to put the pot in here. Some more quilting, there's the other handle on the pot. Then the pot goes down, the leaves, and some more quilting up here, more leaves and quilting. Let's see, now we're going with the flowers. So we've got the 1, 2, and 3 flowers. So if you wanted to trim the quilt prior to starting stitching the flowers, then you could do that after you've stitched out hooping number 8 in the 200 by 300 millimeter set of designs. So we are going to be, or I am going to be stitching, let me scoot up quickly this way. I am going to be following along with the short vase and the 240 by 360 millimeter hoop. Whichever set of instructions you need to look at, whether it's the tall vase, big hoop, little hoop, short vase, big hoop, little hoop. Everything goes exactly the same in terms of how you get the design onto, or how you stitch a design. You're always going to stitch a placement line in color number 1 on a piece of stabilizer that is in the hoop. Then you're going to align your background fabric onto the stabilizer in the hoop, do the stitching. It's actually pretty straightforward when you get the hang of it, and I'll be showing you each of the hoopings that I'm going to do, and we will definitely be taking a look at how to add the petals to the flowers when we get to those hoopings. If you need a reminder how to stitch a design, it's the last page of each of the documents. To stitch a design, mark your background fabric as specified. We're only going to do that one time for the whole project. Load, or for the whole center I will say, load a piece of medium weight tearaway stabilizer. This is going to be the Ultra Clean and Tear. The Ultra Clean and Tear separate sheet is going to be marked up for your background fabric. Load the design into your embroidery machine, stitch color number 1. That's your placement line to show you where to position the fabric. Then you're going to go to your padded surface. My favorite is this June Taylor cushioned quilters square and blocker. Allows me to put a pin in to use as a pivot point to make sure that everything is perfectly aligned. So you're going to get everything aligned. Number 2, color number 2 is always going to give you a basting line so that everything is securely attached to the stabilizer in the hoop. And you are going to do all of the stitching that you need to do, stitch any applique placement lines, put your applique shapes in place. When everything is done, you're going to remove everything from the hoop, remove your basting line and any excess stabilizer that was in the hoop from around the outside of the design. The marked stabilizer stays in place for the duration of stitching all of the designs. Then you're going to repeat that for every design that you need to, and then finally all of the stabilizer that was in the hoop, or the excess stabilizer that was in the hoop, should have been removed. And there's actually, because of all of quilting, there's not going to be any of the marking stabilizer to tear away, but you will trim the panel, stabilizer batting intact. So let's go and actually do some marking up on the stabilizer and get to stitching this center panel. We are ready to get hands on fabric and thread and get this center panel stitched up. So I have my piece of stabilizer. Now remember, I'm stitching up the short vase here. If you're stitching up the tall vase center, then you're going to have some slightly different markings, but the general concept is the same. So make sure that you have the instructions in front of you if you are stitching up the tall vase. Now then, because of the size of my workspace and how much I can fit in on the camera, I've actually got my piece of stabilizer sideways. So I'm going to mark the top over here on the left hand side. I wanted you to be able to see everything. Now I'm using a 0.5mm mechanical pencil to do my marking. This is my tool of choice because it has a really nice fine point and I can get a really accurate line drawn with this. If you have trouble seeing, do not do that to draw a thicker line. That is going to, or to get a darker line, it's going to give you a thick line and you are going to lose your accuracy. So if you cannot see a pencil line clearly, then get yourself a black pen, an extra fine point black pen. Sharpie has some Sharpie pens, Pigma pens, Micron pens, all kinds of different things, but one with the finest point possible, so that you can see the line without having to go back and forth along the ruler. So we are always going to start out with a vertical and a horizontal center line. And so this piece of stabilizer measures actually just shy of 20 inches. So I'm going to count it as 20 inches that way and 24 inches this way. That means that we want to measure 10 inches in from the edge. Now, I've got this lined up with a line on my mat. I actually have decently fine lines fine line markings on the mat, and they are every half an inch. So given that I have a 9.5 inch ruler, I am going to measure actually a very scant ½ inch in from the edge, and this is going to be my vertical center line. Remember, I've got this oriented sideways so that I can show you all of everything that I'm doing, and I've got the top marked over here. So this is going to be my vertical center. I used the edge of the stabilizer and the mat as a guide for this first line, but now that I've got this line here, every other line that I draw is going to use this line as the baseline. So next up, we want a horizontal center, and I'm going to measure 12 inches from the end. This is 24 inches. For the bigger quilts, I think you will have 30 inches, but check that. So having got that there to mark the center, now I am using this line here to make sure that I am perfectly perpendicular, and I'm going to draw my second line here. Now when I'm drawing the line, I'm making sure that I've got the very point on my pencil right up against the ruler. Okay, now next up, if you are stitching in the bigger hoop, the 240 by 360, we need a vertical line 6 inches to the right of center, 6 inches to the left of center. Again, my top is over here. If you're working with your top up here, you're going to be right and left. But with my top up here, we're first of all going to be 6 inches to the right. So I want to make sure that I've got the 6 inch line on the vertical center line, and this is also an opportunity to make sure that I've got everything square and perpendicular. That way I'm going to draw this. So that is my 6 inches to the right. Now we're going to do 6 inches to the left. So measuring, counting from this way, 6 inches actually goes to there. Now, if you find it easier to move your piece of stabilizer around when you're drawing the lines, absolutely do that. Okay, we are good along here. I am at 6 inches. This is a 9.5 inch wide ruler, so I'm making sure that I'm actually getting the right 6 inches here, and also making sure that we are perpendicular there. And so I can draw that line in, and that is going to be my 6 inches to the left. If you are stitching in the smaller hoop, then you're also going to want to draw 3 inches to the right and 3 inches to the left of your vertical center line. Now we want to do horizontal lines 6 inches above and below. So this is my horizontal center line. When my top's up here, we are going to measure 6 inches this way. Let's make sure that we are spot on all the way along, and also use all of these lines that we've already drawn to make sure that we're good. We are 6 inches from the edge here. I'm going to draw that line there. I'm actually going to flip the ruler around. We're measuring 6 inches, so we want to be there. Now, the more accurate you are when drawing these lines, the easier everything is going to be. We are good along the 6-inch line here. We're perpendicular here and here. So let's get this line drawn along there. Now, again, if you're stitching up the tall vase, your lines are going to be a little bit different, but you're going to use the same technique for drawing them. Now, I am actually going to do a double check here. We've got the vertical, the horizontal, and essentially 6 inches in all directions. So if I put 6 inches on the center line, we're 6 inches that way, and we're 6 inches that way. Let's double check this one. 6 inches on the center line. We've got 6 inches that way, 6 inches that way. So the markings are good. Definitely worth doing a double check. Now then, we are ready to get a little sandwich going here. Let's pop that off to the side, and I'm going to bring my background fabric in. And this is the script, the white script from Amanda's botanical line, Amanda Murphy's botanical line for Benetex. Absolutely beautiful. It's got beautiful words on here, and it is actually worthwhile making sure that you have a top and a bottom, because this is kind of a directional fabric. So I am going to say my top is going up here, and I want to put this right side down. And because it's white, I want to make sure that I've got any bits of fluff sitting on the back of the fabric just eliminated. So I have got that right side down, and I'm going to tape it to my cutting mat on the corners just to make sure it stays nice and flat when I am putting the batting on. So right side down, that is my background fabric. That is what I'm choosing to be the top. Here's my piece of batting. So we're going to center this onto the fabric, smooth it out from the center. So you really do want to make sure that you've taped your fabric down so that you can get everything super nice and flat. Okay, now we're going to take the marked stabilizer and center that on everything as well. And now that I've got that all nicely layered, I'm going to take the tape off the corners. It's got stuck to the mat there. I'll at least take it off those bottom corners, and I'm going to pin based. So I'm going to pin along these lines that we've marked. You want to keep everything as flat as possible. And let's pop some pins down the vertical as well. Let's see, don't really need one in there. Now time to get the tape off the top bits here. Might want to add another pin, let's see, I'm going to be starting stitching up there, ending down here, pop another couple of pins in. This way I'm going to be stitching from here up that way. So I'm basically putting the pins in to make it easy for them to be whipped out as I'm basting. Let's just pop those two in because we want to make sure that everything is securely anchored. Okay, I'm going to flip it over and make sure that we are nice and smooth on the back here, which is the right side of the fabric. And now I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch along all of the marked lines using a 6mm stitch length, which is 4 stitches to the inch. Make sure that whatever you put in the bobbin, the color is easily seen on your background fabric. Then you'll have all of the markings on the right side of the fabric and on the wrong side of the fabric, which will make everything super easy to get everything positioned exactly where it needs to be. So I'm off to do my stitching and I'll be back with you very soon. All of the basting lines have been stitched. So this is the right side, this is the wrong side with the stabilizer. I've got my top up here, so top's kind of up here. A couple of points about doing the basting. I highly recommend that you stitch the vertical and the horizontal center lines first. After each line has been stitched, give everything a quick press from the front. Press from the center to the outside, and then if there is any wrinkling, you can press it out before it gets horrible. Another thing is, especially if you're doing the basting on your embroidery machine, make sure that you've got the bobbin threaded for regular stitching. If you have the bobbin threaded for embroidery on some of the machines, the bobbin thread will be way too tight and everything will get all wrinkled. So stitch the vertical and horizontal center lines first, press from the center out before you stitch any of the others. Give everything a quick press afterwards as well. Now then, we are ready to stitch the first design. So hoop size is going to determine exactly which design that is, and tall versus short is also going to determine which design you're going to stitch. So you are going to want to have the instructions right in front of you. Now I'm looking at this on my iPad and it's telling me for the first design I want to have the top on the left hand side, and I'm working on my cushion quilter square and blocker here, but I want the top on the left hand side. I'm going to stitch color number 1, which is going to give me this intersection here. It looks remarkably like this intersection here. And this is showing me that with the top over there, the hoop is going to be oriented this way, and it is the intersection on the stabilizer where it corresponds with the intersection of the horizontal line 6 inches below center and the vertical line 6 inches to the left of center. So this intersection here corresponds with this intersection here, and we can see that, scoot that right off, we can see that is exactly the same intersection that we've got in the diagram. So with the hoop here, I like to line my intersection up with the center of the padded surface here, just so that I've got another kind of shot on the lines. Now I am going to grab a pin, preferably a straight pin. A lot of ours have been getting bent. And I'm going to put that pin through this intersection that we've identified as being the correct intersection. Top's over here on my left. So can we see this intersection here is this intersection here? We are going to guide this pin through the intersection right here, and we want that pin to go in as straight as possible, as vertical as possible. Push it all the way in. That gives me a really nice pivot point. So I want to align this so that this line is matching up with this stitching line on the stabilizer, and this line is. So making sure that everything is pushed firmly down onto the stabilizer here at the pin. I'm going to lift that up. I have actually got that beautifully rotated so that we have perfect alignment here. And I'm going to flip up here, and we can see that I have up there as well. Beautiful. I'm going to pop a couple of pins in there just to hold that in place. I can always pivot the background fabric around the pin if everything is not straight. Let's check over here. That is beautifully aligned. So we're going to pop a pin in there just to hold everything. And this fourth one should be beautifully aligned as well. It is. And so we are good. We have this positioned exactly where it needs to be. Now the trick is keeping it exactly where it needs to be whilst we take it over to the embroidery machine. And sometimes you're going to have areas where you can see stabilizer, and sometimes you're not. So if you can see stabilizer, you can always use Scotch Magic tape to hold that edge in place. We're going to pop some there. We're going to pop some right there. Up here, make sure that everything is nice and flat, and you can see where the design is going to be stitching. So I know there's nothing stitching up here. I'm actually going to remove that pin and push it in up here. I've got it almost flat against the hoop, which is going to make it easier to kind of poke it through all the way. Same here, push that pin in. I'm going to grab one of those pins, push that there. We don't need these two because we're using tape over there. Now I'm going to slide my fingers underneath the hoop, and I'm going to pull this pin out until I hear it pop out of the board, and then equal pressure from above and below, put the pin in. Now you might find that first couple of times you try this, you're poking holes in your stabilizer. That's just because you're pushing too hard on the back. When you get used to it, you should be able to gauge pushing on your thumb or finger from the top so that you can get that pin to go through. If you do poke a hole in your stabilizer, just start again. That's by far the easiest way of doing things. So there are a couple of checks. First off, make sure that looking at the picture, have you got your hoop oriented to where it needs to go? And secondly, you can flip everything over, hold everything up to a light, and you should be able to see through the stabilizer to make sure that you are actually nicely aligned on the placement lines. Those two checks in place, then you're going to go to the machine and you're going to stitch the design. And for the most part, the first design you're going to stitch, regardless of your hoop size or tall versus short, it's going to be quilting. So I'm going to go away and get that stitched up. That is the first hooping finished. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to mention before we go any further. You'll notice that I have trimmed away the basting lines or the placement lines from underneath the quilting. So the design in color number 2 is always going to give you a basting line, and that holds the background fabric securely in place on the stabilizer. So once you've got that basting line, you can halt your machine or pause the machine and remove any of the basting line that you know is going to get stitched over. It's much easier to take it out before it gets stitched over. So one thing that you do want to make sure is do not remove any intersections that you're going to need for future hooping. So you want to keep that intact there. You should be able to see from the design on the machine approximately where the design is going to stitch out to, or you'll be able to see in the instructions. So I clipped just inside the basting line here all the way down to here, and for this bit I only removed up to there because I could see on the design that I wasn't going to be stitching too far up here. So just a little note to do that every time you are stitching a new design. So now that this has finished stitching, we're going to remove the pins, remove the tape, could actually take everything out of the hoop first, but we got the tape gone there. One thing, or another thing, I'm using a variegated thread for the diamond stitching. I love the way that that looks. Okay, now we're taking everything out of the hoop. That can pop to one side for just a moment. We'll flip everything over, and actually from doesn't really matter whether you do it on the right side or the wrong side. We're going to clip all of the stitches on the basting line. So clip every 3 to 4 stitches, and then a tug on the bobbin thread will bring them right out. When you're going along here, make sure that you are only getting the basting stitches and not the placement line. Don't want to destroy the placement line before we've finished with it. Okay, now we can flip over, grab hold of the basting line and give that a tug. Let's trim this jump there and there, and now we're going to remove the stabilizer that was in the hoop from around the outside of the quilting design. And there goes an alarm that I need to call Heather and wake her up. It's in the middle of the day. She is working night shift for AMR in Tucson. So if you're in Tucson and need an ambulance to come and get you to take you somewhere, then chances are it might be Heather. Okay. So stabilizer right up to the quilting line. Then we're going to just grab all of these loose threads and tidy up just a little bit. And I will be back with you in a moment or two to show you how we're going to get set up for the second hooping. We are now all ready for the second hooping, so we can essentially ignore the fact that we've already got this stitched on here. It really doesn't matter. We've got the image for how the hooping is going to be situated for the next hooping, so whichever picture that you need, make sure you've got that in front of you. The way that I'm reading this, when I've got the placement line stitched on the stabilizer, I am going to have the top of the quilt down here at the bottom of the hoop. So top of the quilt at the bottom of the hoop, and I am looking at this intersection here, which corresponds with this intersection here. So this here equals that there, and that needs to sit right here at the intersection stitched on this stabilizer. So we are going to put a pin through here. We are going to put that same pin through the intersection here, holding the pin as vertical as possible. See, we've got a pivot point here. We are going to get everything securely onto the stabilizer at the pivot point, then lift up and rotate as necessary to make sure that the line on the stabilizer is corresponding with the line stitched on stabilizer in the hoop. The closer you get to the end of that line, the more accurate you can be. So we're good down there. I'm gonna pop a pin in there just to secure that. Then we're gonna go up here and need a little adjustment there. Again, the further away from the pin you get, the better. I think we're good up there, so we can pop a pin there, and then we're going to check here. We're spot on that side, and we are spot on that side too. So I'm going to pop a pin there. Now then, we've got stabilizer showing down here and along the side, so I can use tape to hold that in place, and I can use tape to hold that in place there. And down this side, I'm going to put a couple of pins, actually take them out of the center there, and we'll get a pin up here. We don't need that one. Again, fingers under the hoop, pull a pin out of the board. You should be able to hear it pop. Same pressure from above as below to get that pin through. And this last one, make sure that everything is nice and flat in the hoop. Make sure that you are aligned where you need to be in comparison with your picture. So we've got the top down here, top there, and we're aligned with the correct intersection. And then flip over, and you should be able to see, especially if you hold up to a light, that you have everything aligned on the placement lines. So off to the machine I go. Remember, as soon as you stitch the basting line, pause the stitching and delete, I was going to say delete any of the basting line that you don't need. Remove any of the basting line from underneath, or that will be underneath the stitching. So looking at this, there is stitching that goes maybe a third of the way between there and there. So I'm going to remove the stitching up to about here, over there, and there's stitching maybe up to about here, so I can remove that. I want to make sure I have that intersection in place for a future hooping. So I'm going to start stitching color number 2. As soon as we've done all the way around with the basting, everything is secure, I'm going to remove those basting lines and then keep stitching. Now this particular design has some applique. It has some of the leaf appliques in there. So refer to the thread charts whenever you have an applique. that's going to stitch out, you will get a placement line first, and then you're going to put your pre-cut shapes in place. Other than that, we are just stitching away here. So I'm going to go and get this design stitched up. This second hooping has finished stitching and it's looking quite beautiful. So time to take this out of the hoop. Let's pop that off to one side. We're going to remove the stabilizer that was in the hoop. And whoops, got tangled up in the microphone there with the sticky stuff. And we're going to remove the basting line. Now you can see that the basting line is pretty much on top of the placement line here and along here, so be super careful when clipping the stitches. Sometimes, and this is actually one of those cases, it's easier to clip on the back because we can get to the basting line and guarantee that we're not clipping the placement line. So let's just trim those few jump threads across there, and I'm going to snip every 3 to 4 stitches on the bobbin thread, and then it will be easy to grab the thread on the top and whip these basting stitches out. Okay, so we turn over and grab the top thread there. Everything pops out, all of those stitches, and we can grab all of these little bits of bobbin thread, scoot them out the way. You could also use a piece of Scotch tape or a lint roller to grab all of these things and pick them up. That is probably a really good idea. Okay, let's see if we can grab that knot. Sometimes if you have a knot that doesn't want to come out, you can grab it from the back and trim a bit, and that usually makes it easier to get out on the front if it hasn't obliged yet. This one is tucked right next to the placement line. Okay, we got it. Now then, we're going to remove the stabilizer from all around the outside of the quilting and the applique. Got a stitching line there. Okay, there we go. Let's just tidy up a little bit on these. We want to get rid of as much overlapping stabilizer as possible from what was in the hoop. A little bit down here that we can get rid of as well. Okay, we're good. Now then, let's see, the top is up there, so the top is up here, and there are a few more hoopings. We're going to go across here now in this particular version and do some quilting, get some leaves in, so they all go together exactly the same way that these two did. So make sure that you're looking at the diagram in the instructions for the particular set of designs that you're using. You're going to position the fabric on the stabilizer in the hoop, aligning the intersection. And when I'm going to go away and do over here, down here, and then I will get to the first flower. When I'm ready to get that stitched out, I will come back to you and we will have a look at how the flower goes together and getting the petals situated and folded. It's going to be gorgeous, so I'll be back with you soon. We're finally at the point when stitching the center, when we've got a flower and we're ready to add some petals to it. Now then, I am on hooping number 5, stitching up the short vase version of the quilt in a 240 by 360 millimeter hoop. It's actually my Benina Jumbo hoop that I have here, and I've stitched out everything in this 5th design up to and including the petal placement line. Now, wherever your flowers come in the stitching order, you're going to start out stitching them just like any other design with an applique shape in. So the first design with the appliques in had these leaves. The second design with the appliques in had the leaves that we see over here. Let me see, we went 1, 2, 3. The first and the 4th design just had quilting. This one has some quilting in it first, and then it does some of the leafy bits and all of this down here. And finally we have the applique placement line to put the flower applique. Stitch everything as you would for a normal applique, and then make sure you're looking at the thread charts and look out for the petal placement line, and that is going to stitch a circle regardless of whether it's the 5-petal flower, the 6-petal flower, or the 7-petal flower. It's going to stitch a circle, and it's going to have some lines coming out of it so that you've got guidelines for where to put the petals. So this is the 6-petal flower. We've got 6 lines coming out of this center circle. So you should have your petals already prepared, stitched up, turned, pressed, and looking beautiful. If you were to put a petal up against that circle, you'll see that the petal pretty much goes right around the edge of the circle here. So, you know, if you really wanted to, you could literally just lay them out flat and still end up with something looking really remarkable. So I'm starting with the petal edge here on one of the lines, and let's see, where would the next one be? The next one would be somewhere there. Then we would have one somewhere there, and you could literally just overlap the petals and let's see, that one would go over the top there and under there, and that actually would still look really pretty. Or you can do some folding. So there are folding guides, and you can use them or not. There are so many different ways to fold these petals. You know, you can have them looking as anything you like. Basically, the gist is to get one edge of the petal there, one edge of the petal there. So if we put that like that and that like that, and then squished it down, that's one option. If you want to do a little bit more delicate folding, you can fold on that folding line, then fold it into the center. I am going to pop a pin in there and do the same thing from the other side. So fold and fold into the center. So that is a possibility, and that has a fair amount of the fabric on the back of the petal showing up on the front as well. You could fold everything in the same direction. So if we folded there and there, pop a pin in, to hold it flat, and then fold there, and that actually would fold over to the edge, and pop a pin in like that. So you could even on the 6-petal flower have alternating petals folded 2 different ways. Let's see, you could fold, I guess if we folded that up to the top and folded it under there, you'd wind up, especially if we did that on the other side, you'd wind up with more of a flat effect on the front and the folds showing up on the back. So lots of different ways to do the folding. Another possibility, if you're not so keen on the idea of folding, is if you go to your sewing machine and stitch a scant 1/4 inch seam with a 6mm long stitch length, and just keep adding on. Stitch all the way around, all 6 in this case petals, and end up with them all in a line. Maybe do that twice, so once a scant 1/4 inch away and a second time just inside that, and then use the threads to gather the petals so that you've got kind of much more of a gathered effect going on, maybe looking something like that. So lots of different possibilities. I think I am going to go with this fold, so I'm just going to undo that, fold it there, and bring that into the center, pin that there. So these will end up looking something like that. Now, interestingly, Cass stitched up some of the coasters, and she has been pressing her petals to keep the folds in them. I've not been doing that. I've been going for much more of a unpressed look. It actually never occurred to me to press these. So either way, you'll end up with a slightly different look if you were to take that and press the folds in. One of the things that we've actually noticed is that we've had a fairly humid summer here in Chandler, and with the humidity, the petals have been kind of fluffing up a little bit. So that's been fun to watch. Sometimes the flowers, it's almost like they've got life in them. Some days they'll be a little bit fuller than other days, and then they'll flatten out again. So once you've got your petals folded, or once I've got these petals folded, I'll take you back over to the machine and show you how we're going to go about actually positioning the petals. And once we've got the petals stitched in place, then we're going to do the center. Now, you can see there's kind of a divot forming in the middle here, so we're actually going to use a piece of batting to fill that in. We're actually going to have 2 pieces of batting. So this first piece of batting is going to fill the center, and there will be a trim line to trim away the excess batting, and then the second piece of batting smooths over the center of the flower before the actual center is added. So that's what these petals are going to look like. I am going to go to the machine now, and I'll show you how we actually get these guys stitched in place. I'm back at the machine and ready to stitch the basting line that is going to hold the petals in place. Now, it's a good idea to do a quick step through of the stitches so that you know which direction the machine is going to stitch. That helps tremendously. So I'm just going to go into broken thread mode here, on the Bernina, it's actually going to do a straight stitch all the way around the circle, and we're going to stop and go as we're pushing petals down. Then it's going to come back and do a zigzag stitch to hold everything more securely. So you see, we're actually going to start going in the clockwise direction. So this is the first petal that goes down, and it's going to stitch actually counterclockwise around the circle. So let's just pop that back to the beginning there. So I know that my first petal needs to sit right in here, and we're going to get the curved edge of the petal right up against the circle, and the petal should sit in between the two lines that are shooting out from the circle there. So I'm going to turn the machine down way slow, and we will stitch right up to the edge here. And I'm going to use the hand wheel actually to pop the needle down, and I'm going to leave the pins in for the time being. I'm going to pop the foot up, and the next petal is going to go right next to that one, and we're going to have the curved part right up against the circle. Not sure if you can see because my hand's in the way. And now we're going to stitch the next part. And again, I'm going to put the needle down. We're using the hand wheel. The next petal is going to go in. Let me just trim that thread away. So I'm going to pop the next petal right there. I've actually got my petals folded a little bit on the tight sides. We've got some gaps going on here, but not to worry. Okay, this goes the fourth petal. Fifth petal coming along. And the last petal should sit right in between right there. And when it's got back to the beginning doing this single stitch, it's going to go back in the opposite direction with the zigzag. And we can actually speed the machine up just a little bit here because everything's in place. I still have the pins in at the moment. Okay, now you can just whip the pins right out at this point. If you want to make sure that stuff is not popping up and getting where it has no business being, you can use tape to hold the petals down on the outside edge. So just use some Scotch Magic tape. But now we are ready to put the center in. So I have the center fabric, which has been beautifully fussy cut, and I have two pieces of batting. So the first piece of batting, simply going to place over the divot or over the hole in between the petals, and we're going to stitch the first placement line, or the first trimming line actually. Now that we've done that, I'm going to trim the excess fabric away. So I'm just going to pull that away from the machine and you should be able to stitch right inside, or cut rather, right inside the edge of the petals. And you're probably going to be well advised to take this completely off the machine actually, so that you can cut more easily than I am doing right here. I like to use my curved scissors because that, I think, just makes getting in much easier. You want to stitch or trim as close to that stitching line as you can. So now we're going to pop this back on the machine, and the second piece of batting is going to go down right over that hole. This guy is going to kind of smooth over what we've got going on there. So let's get the next trimming line stitched up. If you want to, you can hold the batting in place with tape. Usually it's got enough static cling that it will just sit there. So now I'm going to move this off the hoop a bit, or off the machine, and we're going to trim again really close to the stitching line. I'm actually going to take this completely off the machine so that I can rotate the hoop as I'm doing the trimming. So give me just a moment here and I will have the hoop back on the machine. So again, we are cutting as close as possible to that stitching line to trim away the excess batting. And got a bit of fuzzy going on right there. Okay, popping this back on the machine. And we're going to now position the center fabric, and we've actually fussy cut this. Whether or not I will be able to get it in the center, I can actually feel the edges of the petals, so I think that's going to be good about there. And I'm going to stitch the last trimming line, and again, if you're not happy having your fingers close into the machine, then use a little bit of tape to hold this fabric in place. I'm just going to pop the hoop off the machine one more time and trim away the excess fabric from around the outside of that trimming line. Again, getting as close to the trimming line as you can. And all the while that you're doing this trimming, you want to make sure that you're not cutting any of the petals. So depends to a certain extent on how you folded them, but make sure that you're not cutting into your petals. Almost done with the trimming here. Okay, now I'm going to go back onto the machine, and there are 3 colors left. Doesn't matter which of the petals or which of the flowers you're stitching. There's going to be a satin stitch around the center, and then there's going to be an inside triple and an outside triple. So I'm going to let those get stitching. That is a flower with some petals added to it, and you can fluff the petals up as much as you want to. You can smush them flat if you want to, although I have to say I like them all fluffed up. you're going to finish the other 2 petals in exactly the same way. Now the 3 sets of petals for the different flowers on the Maxi quilt are different, so play with different ways of folding them. Make sure that you have them fit between the lines. I've actually got a much bigger gap there than I really would like to, but so make sure that they fit between the lines, and have fun with folding them. Make them your flowers. Yours are going to look different to somebody else's. So I'm going to go away and stitch up the other 2 flowers, and the last hooping on this particular version or particular set of designs is the vase. The placement exactly the same as I showed you for the first 2 hoopings. Make sure you're looking at the diagrams for the particular set of designs that you are stitching up, and you're going to end up with something beautiful. So when I have stitched up the remainder of the designs for this center panel, it will be time to start trimming everything so that everything can be assembled.